Before Apple made the iPad, before Apple made the iPhone, even before Apple made the iMac, they made this, the Apple Newton. Now, we're all pretty familiar with having a computer in our pocket, but it was the Palm Pilot that really kicked off that revolution and gave us the power that we needed on the go. Now, this Palm Pilot is from 1996. It's touchscreen. It does recognize handwriting, but you have to have like a special way of writing. It's called the graffiti alphabet, and you have to write the characters a certain way for it to work. But back in the day, you could actually get apps for this machine and install them and run them just the same way that we are familiar with running apps on our devices today. But the actual genesis that kicked off this whole portable computing scene was the Psion Organizer, released in 1984. Now, this version I have here is from 1986. It's pretty similar to the 1984 version, except it has this case. And it is a fully programmable computer. You can write apps for this, you can program on it. It has a built-in diary, it has notes, all of the apps that we're used to with our personal organizers. It has a clock, you can set the alarm on it. Yeah, it's a nifty little device. But of course it is limited, only having the 2 lines of text on the screen. Now, Psion went on to make various different types of organizers, but it really began with this. Which leads us to the Apple Newton, which sits in between these two in the timeline. Development was actually started way back in 1987, which is quite remarkable when you think about the kind of computers we were using in 1987. Now, obviously, the technology just did not exist for the thing that they wanted to make back then. I mean, we were still using things like this with 2 lines of text and sort of clunky buttons to input stuff, and they had this vision for a touchscreen device that would recognize your handwriting, but the technology just wasn't there to make it happen until they developed the ARM processor. That's right, the CPU in this unit here is like the great-great-great-great-grandfather of the CPU in current model Macs or iPhones or iPads. It all started here in the Apple Newton, and that low-powered processor enabled them to do some pretty funky things for the time. Now, they may have started development in 1987, but they didn't release anything until 1993, which is this, the MessagePad 100, or otherwise known as the H1000, the original Apple Newton. Now, I bought this model as not working, which is less than I can say for the other 2 PDAs which I have in my collection, which work fine. Now, it's interesting I use the term PDA because the Newton was the first device to actually use that term, PDA, which stands for Personal Digital Assistant. It all began with this. Let's have a look around this one, and then we'll figure out if we can get it working, and hopefully we can, and have a play with it. So here we have the Newton, and straight off the bat we can see that it's got quite a large screen. In fact, it's about the size of the entire Palm Pilot itself. Now, one thing that Palm Pilot appears to have pinched from the Newton is these kind of hard-coded buttons down here, these shortcut buttons. The Palm Pilot obviously has them as well. We've got a speaker down here, of course the lovely multicolour Apple logo still hanging around at this point. Bit of writing here, Newton and MessagePad. Let's have a look on this side here. We do have the built-in stylus, so it has its little place to live there, and it clicks in. Now, this is just a dumb stylus. It has no electronics in it. It's just a pokey stick, really, and you could use that to do your poking around on the screen. Now, also on this side, we have a couple of ports. One of them being a serial connection. We can connect that to any Mac, which we might try if we can get this unit working. We might try connecting it up and see if we could transfer some data. And we've got a external power jack here as well. So over on this side we've got not much, just a power button, which is not going to do anything because there's no batteries in this unit at the moment. And we've got an interesting sort of an arrangement up here, which I'll talk about in just a second. Now, over on the back we've got all our model information here. Takes 7 volts in. And underneath here we have where our batteries go. Now, there is a bit of a complicated arrangement as far as the batteries go, because this unit uses volatile RAM, which means if you remove the battery, all of your data is gone. So it has a backup battery here. It's got instructions here on how to change the batteries so that you don't take them both out at once. And it's got this nifty sort of lockout switch. So if I flick that over, I can remove that battery, but it locks this from being taken out. And if I flick it back this way, I can take this out, and it locks this battery in, so you can't have them both out at the same time. Well, that's the theory. We've got a little reset button here, and then we put that in the center to in use when we go to use it. Let's throw some batteries in here now, and we'll just see if it does anything at all, this machine. Now the Newton takes 4 AAA batteries, so I'll pop them in the caddy, insert the whole lot back into the machine. So with the battery in, we'll flick the on switch, and you can see the screen goes black, and I can see a bit of flickering. I don't know if you can get that on the camera, but it sort of flashes and flickers, so something's not quite right. It's trying to do something, but it's obviously not happy. So this kind of switch arrangement here, if we slide that there, it slides that locking tab over, and if we push down on this lever here, it's going to slide this out, which is a 2 megabyte flash card. You can get all sorts of different cards to go into a Newton. Oh, there's something else in here. Oh, that reminds me. Let's talk about PCBWay. When it comes to doing your next project, you can either do it the wrong way or the PCB way. That's right, PCBWay has everything you need to create your next project. So much more than just PCBs. They also do sheet metal fabrication, 3D printing, metal printing, CNC machining, you name it, they can do it. Everything you need for your next project can be found at PCBWay. So if you need to know which way to go with your next project, it's PCBWay. So it's quite neat to have the 2 megabyte flash storage card with this particular Newton, Apple branded. Imagine that, Apple back in the day creating expandable storage for their personal devices. Incredible. I think it's time to pull it apart, and we'll see if we can figure out what is wrong with it. So pulling apart the Newton's pretty easy. There's 2 screws on the outside of the case, and there's 5 screws inside the battery compartment, 3 longer ones, 2 short ones, and don't forget the tiny little screw right at the top corner underneath that blanking plate. Under the back cover, there's a whole bunch more screws that we need to take out in order to remove the circuit board. When lifting it out, you just have to pry out the battery terminals as it comes up. It all just comes out together. And we very carefully just want to remove the display ribbon cable. Now we're still connected to the speaker, so we'll just leave it connected for now. With the final screws removed, the plastic interior that contains the screen just lifts away as well, giving us access to the speaker, so we can undo that and remove it from the housing. Now somebody complained in my last video that I didn't show any cleaning, so this is for you. Here's some cleaning shots. Upon opening the machine, it becomes pretty apparent where the issue lies. There's 3 capacitors in the Newton, 2 of which are notorious for leaking. And sure enough, we've got the telltale signs of corrosion around this capacitor and also this capacitor on the other side. Even though there's only 2 capacitors that leak, I'm going to replace all 3 in this machine since I'm in here anyway. I begin by snipping the legs of the old capacitors and then desoldering what's remaining. One of the legs breaks off, which is a bit concerning because it means there's quite a bit of corrosion underneath. I then do a lot of cleaning and scrubbing and cleaning and more scrubbing, and then I do some cleaning, and finally I do some scrubbing and the pads come up clean. So that's a great result, ready for our new capacitors. The new capacitors I'm using are tiny little replacements. They are tantalum polymer capacitors. They don't have electrolytic fluid inside, so there'll never be a leaky corrosion risk again. With the 3 capacitors replaced, it's time to do a test run. We'll apply power, turn it on, and see if we get the OS on the screen. Moment of truth, I've got 7 volts on my desktop supply here, so I'll plug that in. And let's hit the power button and see what happens. Oh, look at that. Newton. Okay, so the screen's working. Everything's turning on. Doesn't look like the touch is working. None of these options will select. The screen just appears totally dead. So there might be an issue with the touch sensitive, whatever it is, the digitizer or whatever it is on the screen. I know it's pressure sensitive. It's not capacitive touch like modern iPads. I'll see if I can figure out the issue. So it's a good start. We've got something on the screen. We'll just see if we can make the touch part work. So I thought I'd investigate where the problem might lie Starting with the digitizer, and I had a look at the cable there and it ran around to the back. Then I noticed it connected to these contacts and there seemed to be a continuity error. I remember seeing earlier there was a lot of corrosion around this area, so obviously one of those small traces has been eaten through. What I did then was to solder a bit of wire across that gap, and then I had to build up the other 3 pads so they're about the same height. And this sort of worked, but then something really bad happened, and I'm struggling to talk about it because I feel really ashamed of it. But I used the hot soldering iron and I touched it against the plastic ribbon just ever so briefly, and it just instantly melted and that carbon trace disappeared. So I mucked around for ages trying to fix it, and I ended up being able to fix it by sticking down a bit of copper braid with some Kapton tape, and that made the connection further back up the ribbon where I could expose some of the original trace. So I did put it back together and I was finding I was able to get some screen input working. So I thought, yeah, maybe I'd fixed it, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. So the screen seems to work, and beats do matter, so I guess it's got that right. But I found the longer I used it, the more the sensor would start to drift. It was fine on the right hand side, but on the left hand side the actual input would start drifting to the right from where the pen was. And the longer you used it, the worse it would get, until it would become fairly unusable. Well, it's a sad day. It's always very frustrating when your own lack of experience leads you to damage something irreversibly, like I've done with this Newton. And, you know, try what I could, I just could not save it, which is really disappointing. And normally that would be the end of the video, but I'm an adult with disposable income, which means I can just buy myself out of bad decisions, which is exactly what I've done. I've bought another faulty Apple Newton. And thankfully this one's actually in better cosmetic condition. It has a nicer looking screen, and it also doesn't work just like this one, but again it's just the capacitors, so I'm going to jump inside, swap out those caps, and then we'll actually get to have a play with the original Apple Newton. Now before pulling it apart, I thought I'd just compare it with the original one to see how similar they are. And I've noticed that the second one that I've got is slightly newer. If you have a look on the second one, it says MP100. The original one I've got doesn't say that, so that's the H1000 model. Now I believe the only difference is a software update, and they relabeled it MP100. But what I did like was that the battery compartment was really super clean on the new one. And just no sign of corrosion at all, which is great to see and bodes well for when we pull it apart. Now I did notice that the new one I've got has a much better screen. You can see the yellowing on the original one that I had, and there's sort of some marks on that screen too, so that's a good result there. The only damage I was able to find was a broken piece of plastic on the corner of this bracket, but I can take the bracket off the original one and swap it over, so no drama there. Now inside the machine was a plastic placeholder card, which you're supposed to keep in there in lieu of a flash card. So yeah, I'll probably put the flash card in there instead. Now what I found quite interesting was the new one came with a plastic stylus and the old one has a metal stylus. But other than that, they're exactly the same design, same tip. So I'm keeping the metal one in the new one, and I'm going to put the plastic one with the old one because the metal one feels much nicer. Now I've got the machine fixed and put back together. I'm not really going to show footage of that because once is enough per video. And just to test it out, I thought I'd try some cursive writing, and I was really surprised how well it did. Got welcome to the basement straight away. So I thought I'd carry on and try a bit more cursive writing. So handwriting recognition seems to be okay on this machine. Now I do notice that it got like a little random is thrown up in there, but a quick scribble and that's dealt with. So yeah, that's pretty impressive. So I just deleted that and you can see the little animation, which is fun. And we went into the extras drawer, and what have we got in here? We've got a few different apps. So basic stuff like a calculator, and yeah, it does what a calculator does. Everything seems to work. And in the formulas app, there's a few different formulas and things to calculate. So under the loan one that I had a look at, you can say your loan is going to last for maybe 20 years at an interest rate of perhaps 7.5%. The loan amount might be for $100,000, and that should tell you your monthly payment, which is $805, and you'll be paying $93,000 over the life of that loan. Pays to be a bank. If we have a look inside time zones, we can tell it where we are, and Melbourne is the closest city to where I am, so I'm picking that one. And then I'm going to say I'm here, and it centers the map on there, so that's nice. Okay, so the preferences is all of our settings here, so you can pretty much set up everything the way you need to. Something like letter style, so you can actually tell the Newton like the way that you write letters so that it can recognize your handwriting a bit easier. And if you look down the bottom of the screen, you can see 1.3, and that's the version of the OS that this machine is running. And in styles, that just tells the Newton how to display the text on the screen. Now the outbox is a place for all of the items that you want to send out to another device or computer, and they sit in the outbox until it's time to sync or beam them. This is one I put in earlier when I was playing around, so I'll just delete that out of there. I don't know what the Sharp application is, maybe it's for a Sharp device, I'm not sure, so I'll leave that alone. And in the connection setting, you can choose whether you're going to connect to a DOS or Windows PC, or there's two options to connect to a Mac, either serial or local talk. If we click on the names, we can see that these are the 4 names. I think they come as standard on the Newton, like the default names, just to have something in there. So what I might do is load this 2 megabyte card into the Newton, and that's going to load a whole bunch of data into all of those areas. So we can actually have a look what it looks like when data's there. Now it takes a little while, and the Newton is just unresponsive. It doesn't give you any dialogue saying that it's working, it just sits there. And it comes up with this screen, and you can choose to either remove the software that's on the card, or you can restore the Newton from whatever is on the card. So I've chosen to restore, and it's just going to overwrite everything on the Newton with what's on the card. So if you have a card in the Newton, it's pretty handy. So if your battery goes flat, you don't lose your data. It's all saved on the card automatically as you go, and you can pull that card out and plug it into another Newton or another computer and get all that data off. So that's a pretty good way of doing it. So you can see here all the data is carried over. There's a whole bunch of names and addresses. You can see here as well that whoever owned this needed to draw a little connection for their Mac Plus to an image writer too. So he's drawn the connections there that he needs. Now I think this machine used to belong to a guy that did AV installs, because some of the notes and things he had on there are things to do with speakers or dimmers and or projection screens, that sort of thing. And yeah, just a whole bunch of that sort of stuff. He's got a few contacts and people on there and phone numbers. I won't bother fuzzing those out because this is before 1996, and in 96 they changed all the numbers in Australia, so all the mobile numbers changed. So you can see there the old mobile numbers 018, and that doesn't exist anymore. That's the old analog mobile network that we used to have, so it's all different now. Plenty of data on there. Whoever this was really did use this quite a bit over a few years, and got the use out of it. So it's good to see that somebody actually used this and enjoyed using it. Now let's see what this chap had to do. He had to pick up a Fantasia screen for cutting down to 6 foot by 4 foot 6, and he had to contact Mark Rosado. So I wonder if he ever did that 30 years ago. What I really want to do with the Newton is simulate using it in the real world 30 years ago. So pretend I'm out and about and I've jotted down a note and I've written something down, like visiting a client or something like that. And then I want to get back to my office and get it onto my computer so that I can email it or print it or what have you. The next step will be trying to connect this to a Macintosh. I've decided to use this little PowerBook 2400C. It has infrared input and it also has serial input on it as well. I haven't actually shown this on the channel before, so I thought it's a good chance to get it out and we'll have a bit of a play with it as well. This was generously donated to the basement by Polymath, who runs his own fantastic YouTube channel. I'll put a link to it in the description. Really worth checking out there. Right, so this is booted up into macOS 9.1, I believe. And we've got our Newton here. So the first thing I want to try is our serial connection. So I've got a serial cable. Let me hook them up and we'll see if we can get them to talk to each other. Now I noticed when I was having a bit of a play around with this, under extras we've got this here called connection. And we can connect to DOS or Windows PC, Macintosh serial or Macintosh local talk. So let's go with serial for now. So I've selected that and I'll click connect, waiting for response. The connection was stopped because there was no response. Well, it does turn out that I need some software on the machine. In hindsight, it's kind of obvious, but well, this is my first foray into the Newton, so I'm discovering as we go. Okay, I've managed to install the software that we're going to need to talk to the Newton. So let's transfer our information. So I think I've worked out that the infrared on the Newton only enables it to talk to other Newtons, I think. But I'm pretty sure we need to use the serial cable to talk to a Mac. Anyway, I've got it connected and I've got the software running that we're going to need. So let's synchronize and get all of our information from the Newton onto the Mac. So starting on the Mac, we've got our Newton connection app running. So let's hit synchronize. And it says here, open a connection from your Newton. So going over to the Newton, I'll just go to extras and I'll hit connection. And we can choose from local talk or serial, and we'll select serial, connect, and now it's waiting for a response. So back over here, right, they've seen each other, so now it's synchronizing. We'll let it do its thing and come back soon. Okay, so it looks like everything's synchronized fine. It did take quite a while, so it took about 20 minutes or so. And I think that's because we've got that CF card in the Newton, so it's a 2 megabyte card there. Serial's pretty slow connection, so it just takes a while to move all that data over. So you can see over here that we've got what's on the Newton and we've got it says card, so I assume that's what's on the card on the Newton. And if we have a look, say in Notepad, we can see all of the notes in there. Now they're all the same notes, obviously, that we've seen on the Newton. And the good thing about this software is that you can edit it on here, so you can go in there, make any changes and what have you, and then you sync it back over to your Newton and you're good to go. Take those changes with you. So that's a good look at how the Newton works together with the Mac. It's kind of clunky when you compare it to today's cloud-based stuff where, you know, everything's on your phone and that syncs automatically with your computer and your cloud storage, everything. So yeah, back in the day, 30 years ago, you had to actually plug it in and let it synchronize. But yeah, for its time, I think it was pretty advanced. Now, 30 years ago, would you have wanted one of these? Well, somebody did, because they had this one and they obviously used it doing their AV installs or whatever it was, getting people's numbers and making sure they had their invoicing done correctly and all that sort of stuff. So they were using it pretty extensively. But personally, I think I would have struggled with that input. It was just too ahead of its time. And while this 1.3 operating system version seems to recognize input pretty well, you're still a lot of the time correcting things and it's just not super easy and intuitive. So yeah, a neat device, a good forerunner of what we've got today, but probably a little bit ahead of its time and not super useful. So I can see why Jobs killed it off when he came back to Apple. But for today, that's been the Apple Newton. You've been in the basement. Have a great day.